talk later.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
For those of us that are on the phone, I haven't done this on the phone yet, so I'm not even sure how to let Jeff know that I want to speak.
Good question.
I guess I wonder, Barb, is there a possibility that we resend out the appropriate link with the missing number, as Councillor Kelly has suggested, and that those councillors, and just send it to those councillors so that they know to log back in with the appropriate link if we take 5?
Yeah.
Sure.
Log off.
Except that the email isn't working here.
Okay, I logged off.
Yeah.
I've got
So-
the invite from what's her name, Carling Peters, sitting here that come in yesterday. It says to log on right there.
I feel like I'm listening to Neil Armstrong from the moon with Councillor Edwards.
So, Councillor Edwards, have you got your Zoom? Have you got Zoom up?
He's trying to log back in.
What, does he have the ID and the password? Is that what the issue is?
I believe he's using the email from yesterday that came out to us, is what I just heard on the call.
Well, I can give him the ID and password.
It's a little more than that.
And we'll have to ask the
We'll have
others.
to ask them to, if they have any questions or if it's in that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we don't see them.
Yeah, I'm gonna mute this other phone number because I don't.
Okay, so Ruth, we're going to have to ask you if you have any comments, and obviously on voting, we're going to have to ask you how you're voting.
Thank you.
Okay, and I know he's having trouble getting in. I hate to delay this much longer.
It's okay. We're just trying to get it.
Get him in?
No. We're trying to get it.
Oh, going.
Just because it's a different format this time.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're still having technical issues at this end.
Well, it's just somewhere in that.
Okay.
So can I ask Peter Kelly, did you get a different email that allowed you to log back in, a second one? Can you forward that to maybe Councillor Edwards and Councillor Nishikawa to see if they can log in?
What I can do whatever you want, but the email, the dial-in number on the agenda didn't work, but the dial-in number that was forwarded yesterday by Kelly Peters, it was a reminder that came out yesterday afternoon. It has a longer number and it worked.
Okay, if you could see the reminder that came.
Yes, I used the email. I used the one from Kelly Peters and it worked fine.
Yeah, it works fine.
Okay.
I agree. Although it did ask for an email to join the
Didn't ask me.
webinar.
That's because you're suspicious.
Yes, thank you.
All right, bye.
No, it asked me for my email as well. Well,
What you sent out yesterday, I copied it right off the invitation, what I sent yesterday, and I think what's on the agenda was copied from that, maybe there's. No, well, all these other people signed. Don't know.
I used the original, but I had to put it through. I figured it was better.
Okay, so Jane, we're good?
We're good.
Yeah. Think other than not having now.
Numbers will keep growing. A lot of people don't want to speak.
Yeah, Jane, I'm gonna go through names and these.
So can we start? Can we
Yes.
start? Okay. So are we live now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So council present except for Councillor Edwards. Let's try to-
Yep, okay. So good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our Planning Committee meeting on July the 16th. My apologies for the late start. This is the first time we're trying to run this and allow the public to come in, and it's a different format, and we're in learning mode. So there may be a few glitches along the way, but I'm sure everybody understands this new format is probably going to carry us through for a number of months. So that's what we we'll get it down to a fine science. This meeting is an electronic meeting. It is being held in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I will verbally confirm that the committee members are all present except for Councillor Edwards, who is having trouble getting into the meeting. So hopefully he'll be able to join us as soon as possible. And Councillor Nishikawa is on phone in at this point. So we will be asking her to for comments and also voting. I verbally confirm also that our CAO, Mr. Hammond, is here. Director Pink is here. Mr. Allen is here. And so we have the township staff present. And the public input to this meeting was invited through planning@muskokalakes.ca. Also, just a couple more housekeeping things. Motions have been pre-populated with random movers and seconders just to expedite the meeting. And members will physically raise their hand until the chair has confirmed the vote. If the vote is unclear, a verbal vote shall be recorded by the clerk, but this does not constitute a recorded vote. So, all right. So next is acknowledgement of a supplementary agenda, and we do not have one today. So I will now ask if any members have a pecuniary interest that they would wish to declare at this point. Ruth, I'm assuming you'll speak up if that's the case. Okay, so we're sorry. Oh, Councillor Edwards is just coming online here, so we have everybody present. Okay, so we will now move then to our first applicant, and I'm going to ask Mr. Allen if he would take us through this application.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
This is my first virtual public meeting, so fingers crossed. This is a public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment 0720 in the name of McAskin. The lands are known municipally as unit number 1, 1133 Whiteside Road, and are presently in the ownership of Patricia McAskin. The lot presently contains a dwelling with sun deck garage, a boat port with dock. In 1998, a bylaw amendment was passed to specifically allow the construction of a dock and a boat port on an undersized lot. At the time, the lot was believed to have 90 feet of frontage, and the proposed dock and boathouse widths would have complied. Since then, a survey has been completed that reveals the lot only has 79 feet of frontage, and the 22.8 feet of existing dock width exceeds the 25% maximum by 3.9%, 28.9% total. The purpose of this bylaw is also to provide an exemption to the dock width, as well as the minimum lot frontage requirement. Currently, the lot has 79 feet of frontage and is not considered a building lot. The applicant is proposing to expand an existing garage, to construct a second story, as well as construct an addition resulting in a sleeping cabin with 554 square feet on the lower level of the expanded garage. The bylaw that was passed in 1998 to allow the construction of the dock and boathouse is proposed to be repealed by this amendment, as the dock and boathouse, boatport, excuse me, have been constructed, and this bylaw is no longer applicable. We've received a number of submissions. I would also mention that the staff report is available on the agenda, including site photos. A site plan can be found on page 23, enlargements of drawings on page 24, elevations and floor plans on page 25 and 26 respectively. We've received a number of submissions related to this application. So similar to our in-person meetings, I am prepared to summarize those comments if committee finds that acceptable.
Yes, please do, Mr.
Allen. We have received comments of no objection from Township Public Works, development services, and the fire department, emergency services. We have received no comments from the District of Muskoka. The initial comments we had received indicated that comments would be sent. It does not appear that new comments have been sent since. We have received a letter of support from Kelly and Bob Fenn at 1146 Whiteside Road. They note that the Fenn, Boland, Casey, and McAskin families have been on Fenn Point since 1897. They've reviewed the plans and support and have been neighbors for a number of years. Peter Marshall at unit number 6, 1160 Whiteside Road supports the proposed dock exemption, but objects to the sleeping cabin and significant expansion to the garage. There's concerns that the second story of the garage may be used as a cabin area. No development on this lot would be permitted if it was vacant. And Mr. Marshall raises concerns about official plan conformity related to sustainable development and indicate that this proposal does not conform with the intended scope of the official plan. We have received a letter of support from Renee and Bill Tolek at 1109 Whiteside Road. They have been neighbors for 40 years, have reviewed the plans and are supportive of the proposal. We've received a letter of objection from Planscape, authored by Greg Corbett on behalf of Cindy and Jeff Jones. They have no objection to the proposed dock exemptions, but they have concerns with the proposed sleeping cabin. They would prefer that the 554-foot sleeping cabin area be attached to the dwelling instead of having 2 habitable buildings versus 1. The Jones would be very happy to discuss the relocation of the existing right-of-way driveway behind the existing dwelling to allow for future expansion of that dwelling. The existing 734 square foot garage is accessory to the existing dwelling, which is approximately 1,300 square feet. A much larger building is proposed, i.e. the expanded garage, and it has a visual appearance of being a second dwelling, and there's questions of it being an accessory use. The Committee of Adjustment decision for the construction of that original garage indicated that one of the reasons was because the garage did not contain habitable space. Mr. Corbett notes that the official plan must consider the official plan has policies that require the consideration of cumulative impacts, and that must be considered in this case. And he notes concerns about enforcement related to the use of the second story above the garage. We have received a letter of objection from Ted and Nancy Robinson. They are opposed. The second story of the garage can possibly be used for more bedrooms, resulting in a high capacity cottage, 6 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. The 2-story building will look into their sleeping area and activity areas, causing an invasion of privacy. The expanded habitable area will increase vehicle traffic and parking on an already congested area. There's a potential that this building could be used, and the property itself could be used for an Airbnb rental. This is effectively a second cottage located on the lot and should not be permitted. Ted and Nancy Robinson have also had a letter prepared on their behalf by Stephen Fauner from Northern Visions Planning. Mr. Fauner notes that Ted and Nancy object to the proposed dock, have no objection to the proposed dock exception, and are strongly opposed to the sleeping cabin proposal. Mr. Fauner notes that the garage is not legal because the previous minor variance assumed a lot frontage of 90 feet and not 79 feet. Mr. Fauner cites a number of official plan policies and notes some conformity issues. It's noted a lack of buffering between the Robinson and the subject property. This lot should not be considered a building lot. The addition to the garage is large, resulting in a total floor area of over 2,000 square feet and appears to be a dwelling. There's concerns about the upper level or upper story of the garage being labeled as garage. Property could be rented, which can adds to concerns related to noise and lack of respect. Mr. Fauner, on behalf of his clients, requests a deferral to determine the status of the garage, or alternatively only to approve the exemptions related to the dock. Those are all of the comments that staff have received. Staff are supportive of the proposed application, subject to a number of conditions. One, that no habitable floor area additions to the dwelling be permitted in the future. Future dock additions are prohibited. Sleeping cabin area is capped at a maximum of 554 square feet, which is the proposed size. And site plan control is required to revegetate the shoreline and screen the proposed garage and sleeping cabin through plantings. With that, I conclude my comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Allen. Would the applicant or the applicant's agent care to speak? I believe we're just letting him or her in right now, so just momentarily.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So my name is Eric Muntz. I'm an architectural and structural designer at the Taconic Group Design and Engineering. I'm the authorized agent acting on behalf of the McAskins. Jim McAskin and Patricia McAskin are also present on the Zoom call. I just want to say thank you to everyone, staff and council, for the effort in getting the meetings going again. The purpose of this amendment is to resolve the existing dock, which was previously approved in 1999 based on the lot frontage being 90 feet. This was determined on a hand sketch site plan. In 2014, a survey was completed and it was determined that the lot frontage is actually 79 feet rather than the previous thought 90 feet. We are hoping to remedy this, remedy the previous amendment. Sorry, I lost my spot there. As part of this amendment, as suggested by staff when discussing the potential for adding a sleeping cabin to the property. With that being said, the other purpose of this amendment is also to permit the construction of a 554 square foot sleeping cabin in the form of an addition to the existing garage. Since I began working on the project, the main focus has always been working towards achieving a sleeping cabin and to have it permitted legally. Previously, family members have met with staff in the past and had some brief discussions of the potential of expanding the cottage. And through those discussions, I think there's a bit of some miscommunications and misunderstandings, and the McAskins were sort of left believing that there wasn't much potential to expand the cottage, and therefore it had been thought that that the only way to expand habitable area was through the form of adding a sleeping cabin some way to the property. This has left us to sort of overlook the potential of expanding the cottage. The possibility of this was first pointed out to us in the staff report, where it states, as of right, the McAskins have the ability to add approximately 1,900 square feet of floor area to the existing cottage. This is possible while meeting the requirements of the bylaw, so as of right. So with that being said, moving forward, the McAskins have decided for this amendment, they would like to remove the sleeping cabin aspect from the amendment and move forward and focus on the expansion as of right of the existing cottage. And then also that the corresponding conditions be removed as well, which I believe would be 1, 3, and 4. And then also, just as staff noted in the objecting letter from the Joneses, who are directly east of the cottage, it mentions the relocation of the existing driveway, which we have a verbal agreement with them that to move forward with this, sort of working together to get that figured out. And yeah, we believe that just with the relocation of the driveway and the bylaw does permit a good amount of by right ability to expand on the cottage.
Thank you, Mr. Muntz. I have a question. Are you still wanting a second story on the garage?
No, we don't. So the existing garage is to remain as is, and no proposed construction is going to be to the garage. It is just focused on the cottage right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pink, how do we procedurally go about this? Because what's in front of us is not what we're now talking about.
Morning, committee. Mr. Allen may wish to expand, but I believe this is somewhat new information that just was revealed, that potentially a fairly significant change to the proposal. One option, in order to keep the process moving, planning committee, if it feels comfortable, can make a recommendation to council as to what they recommend approval of or would consider approval of. Alternatively, it could be deferred for revised proposal to come back to this group so the neighboring property owners and committee and staff could review that more closely. So it's that ultimately really planning committee's discretion as to your comfort level with the changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Mr. Allen, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, I think it's important to keep in mind that you're just making a recommendation to council about the application. So, we've heard from the neighbors that there's some concerns related to the sleeping cabin aspect in the garage. The applicant seems to be willing to revise their plans. I would note that all of the comments that we've received have no concerns with the exemptions related to the dock. And so foreseeably, this committee could make a recommendation to council to proceed with only those exemptions related to the dock and the repealing of the old bylaw from 1989, and the exemptions related to the sleeping cabin could be removed.
Yes, may I?
That would be an option to keep things moving forward and not having to recirculate or come back to the committee for another meeting.
Mr. Muntz, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of confirm just what Mr. Allen's saying, in that, yeah, we're looking to still obviously move forward with the dock portion of the amendment and the repeal portion, and just want to remove the sleeping cabin aspect of the amendment.
Okay, I think that's possible. We'll have to reword the motion because my understanding would be then that if you put an addition on the cottage, it's going to be within our bylaws, and so you wouldn't have to come back to planning for this. I think that's what I'm hearing. Please confirm that or not confirm.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're just going to, Mr. Pink is just going to. Oh, sorry. From everybody? Okay. Okay, so is there anyone else who would like to speak in support of this application? I guess revised application. Now, this is where if you're coming in, you raise your hand and we can let you in. This is all part of the new procedure. There's no one? There are two? Okay. All right. So who is coming in now? Peter Marshall? I believe we're going to have Peter Marshall speak. Mr. Marshall? You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Marshall.
How's that?
That's good. Welcome.
Yeah, Peter Marshall. I'm a resident at 61160 Whiteside Road in Port Carling. Thank you for letting me join the meeting. It's interesting to see the process at work virtually. So, and you folks are doing a fine job. I really commend you, for getting technology in place, and being very effective with the use of it. So thank you. I'm not a direct neighbor. I'm down the road a little bit. I do not know the applicants, and therefore my comments are strictly related to the application, which I understand is now being revised, and I appreciate that. I am an objector, and I really just feel that if I look at the existing bylaws and the official plan and what our intention and objectives are of the municipality, the township, and us as individuals. We have a responsibility to, ensure that we maintain the precious resources we have, and that's why we have official plans and bylaws and things. And unfortunately, the lot at 79 feet of frontage is undersized, and the amendments or the bylaws state that. So it's really not, doesn't even fall within the existing. If you have an existing lot pre-bylaw of 100 feet, you can have some adjustments, but 79 feet is pretty tight. And we have other smaller properties along Whiteside Road, and I'm just concerned that if there's development allowed on this type of property, then it sets a precedent for other properties that are of small nature, and where does it end? And I think that's a real concern. And notwithstanding the recommendations from the planning department, which I think did an excellent job, by the way, of putting together the meeting material, was very helpful. I think it's important to, I have no objection to the dock, as I said before in my written comments. However, if there's going to be a change to the existing cottage structure, which already had an amendment, I guess, previously, and was non-conforming against a non-building lot, I think it's prudent to resubmit those plans, because we don't know what they look like. And I'd like to be able to view those and have comments made on whether or not it's appropriate or not. So I certainly don't have any direction here to the committee. It's your decision, but I think just prudently it would be helpful to the residents and surrounding neighbors to understand what's being proposed. We know what's being taken off the table now, and the dock is not an issue, but I think if there's going to be an adjustment to the existing cottage in lieu of what was proposed, I think it's prudent that we get a chance to view what the exact plans would be. Because as I understand it, it's a non-building lot, so it doesn't comply with the existing bylaws. I think it says that you can reconstruct an existing use, but again, it would have to fall within the bylaw parameters, and I don't know if they do or not, because I haven't seen any drawings. So thank you. I really appreciate that. I think you're doing a fine job, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for responding to my email yesterday. I really appreciate that. And I know you guys are all busy, but I do very much appreciate that. So thank you very much.
You're more than welcome, Mr. Marshall. Thank you. Mr. Allen, can you just maybe clarify that they are legal non-conforming, I believe, just in terms of, in addition to the actual cottage, what they can do within the bylaws, where they wouldn't have to come back to planning and they wouldn't have to.
So for an undersized lot, and in this case, it has less than 100 feet of frontage, existing legal structures can be replaced and expanded in accordance with the requirements of the bylaw. So you'd have to comply with lot coverage, setbacks, height, uses, all of those matters. In terms of the subject property, based on the existing footprints of the existing structures and the 10% maximum coverage within 200 feet of the shoreline, there remains 648 square feet of remaining building coverage within 200 feet of the shoreline. The existing cottage is set back 40 feet from the high water mark. And there are provisions in the zoning bylaw that allow expansions to existing buildings that are located closer than 66 feet. There's restrictions on the percentage of height increase and the area expansion for any new build that's closer than 50. But effectively, the minimum setback for this lot for a cottage that was constructed prior to the existence of the bylaw becomes the 50-foot minimum. So potentially a new cottage could be constructed that's approximately 600 and change square feet larger at a 50-foot setback, full 35 feet of height. Or they could maintain the existing 40-foot setback and work within the limits of the bylaw that restrict expansions in height and area when you're in that proximity to the shoreline. So we haven't received plans to review. If this application hadn't been made, and building permits had been submitted for that expansion, there would be no public meeting process. There would be no site plan approval requirement. It would have been a straight building permit issuance. The building department would have checked capacity with the septic system and either would have given an okay for the existing or required an upgrade. There would be no public process involved.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I just want to make sure that everybody sort of understands what's going on here. So that was in opposition to the applicant. Did we not? We didn't have anybody in support. Is that Kelly? Okay, so who are we going to hear from next then, Kelly? Yes. Okay, so Mr. McAskin is going to speak next, I believe.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Good morning. This is Jim McAskin, and I'm here with my mother, Patricia McAskin. And obviously, this is a new time for all of us, so we do appreciate all the effort taken by the committee to make these arrangements for the telephonic hearing today. One thing, just because it is obviously quite a change in terms of what Mr. Muntz presented this morning versus what the committee had before it in terms of our application. And I just want to give a little context there because I think it's important. We received the planning committee report late Monday evening. So it just was a very short amount of time where we had to review and consider it. And when we did review that language, referencing the ability to increase the existing dwelling by 900 square feet, that really was news to us. My father, who along with my mother purchased the cottage in 1996, was the primary caretaker and decision maker and really did a lot of the work with the cottage. Sadly, he passed in 2013, and the information that he had obviously did not get communicated to us. So while we were certainly focused on the garage bunkie, when this information came to us on Monday evening, it opened our eyes to the ability to add to the existing dwelling, which we simply did not appreciate. So our apologies to the committee for this kind of change in direction, but in the end, we think this is a good thing because we would certainly rather add to the existing dwelling versus a second structure. So I just wanted to give a little context there so that the committee understands why there is this this new request this morning versus what was before the committee in writing. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McAskin. I'm going to ask you for your address in a minute, but actually you don't need to apologize because what's transpiring here is making everybody happier. So I think that's a good thing. So could we just get your address, please?
Yes, it's 1935 Stanford Road, Berkeley, Michigan, 48072.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in support? Anybody else? Mr. Fauner. Mr. Fauner, wherever you are, please. Okay, you're coming in now, apparently. There you are. Okay, thank you. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Here we are. Are we good now?
We are. Welcome.
Good. Thank you very much. Stephen Fauner, Northern Vision Planning Limited, 109 Meadow Heights Drive, Bracebridge, Ontario, P1L1A4. Thanks again for taking the initiative to do these Zoom meetings. I've had some technical difficulties yesterday was an LPAD hearing I couldn't get into, and it was my turn to speak. So it's been a bit of a challenge, but this seems to be working. So thank you very much. I'm representing the neighbors immediately to the west, and that is the Robinsons. That's Ted and Tracy. And certainly it's advantageous that it sounds as though the sleeping cabin portion is going to be dropped from the application. I would like to point out a few things, however, though, that there still are some concerns. This is the fourth Planning Act application for this property, I understand. So obviously it's a very tight property, very small frontage, setbacks to the side yards for the dwelling, very small, oversized dock. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I'm not sure how it can be addressed, the garage was permitted by a minor variance. And it was the reason why the minor variance was applied for was because it had a lot with less than 100 feet of frontage. So now they have a fairly simple, very modest 2-car garage. But now that that structure's there, the zoning bylaw allows them to expand it. And certainly that is not something that the neighbors had agreed to when the minor variance was approved. So, and then when you look at the elevation drawings in this particular case, this is a rather large building, this garage addition, and in fact exceeds the size of the existing dwelling that's there. So you have a whole question as to, is this truly an accessory building? Partly because of size. And I recognize size is not the only criteria, but it is a consideration, that's for sure. So there's still concern with the size of that garage building and the fact that it was, the second story was labeled as garage. So who knows what that's really going to be. There's obviously stairs that go up into that second story. So there's concerns related to that. And I have not discussed this point with my clients, but I do know that they have concerns with the size of the building as well. We know they have certain rights, but it's one of those sort of inadvertent things that you get your foot in the door with a minor variance, and then in the future you can expand that building in a significant way. So I'm not sure if there's a way of limiting that. You could potentially make an amendment to this bylaw. I'm sure that the applicant might think rather harsh, but at the same time, I know my clients are interested in that building staying as a single-story building. That's what it was approved as a garage. And potentially, is there a way of limiting the increase of the floor area too? And I know it's within lot coverage requirements, but here again, I come back to a lot that only has 79 feet of frontage. You had an original building allowed by minor variance, and which stipulated no habitable space in it. And so now we have this situation where it can expand in a rather large fashion. So I'm not sure how that can be addressed. I think that's really the nature of my comments. Certainly, if anything goes ahead, my client would really like to have buffering between the anything to do with the garage and their property, because it is quite open, as evident by the photographs that were taken by staff. Anyways, I think that's the nature of my comments. I'm not sure how to deal with the expansion of the garage, but it is quite large. If it could remain single story, that would be very helpful. I recognize you have to make an amendment to that. Those are my comments.
Mr. Connor, I don't know that you were in at the beginning of this, but the McAskins didn't realize they could add on to the cottage by right, and they have withdrawn the sleeping cabin and the second. Mr. Muntz, could whoever's, sorry, somebody's got
Yes, yeah, I can address,
microphone going
sorry.
here. Could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. So they have withdrawn that. They are not going to do that. So we are now, we've amended the motion now to strictly deal with the dock area. So I just thought I'd let you know that.
Yeah, thank you. And as I indicated in my remarks, I think my client and I, we really appreciate that. There's still the secondary issue, if you will, is the future size of that garage being put in by way of minor variance. It was agreed to that it was a two-car garage. Now it's something much larger. They're taking advantage, I think inadvertently, but they're taking advantage of the bylaw and getting a huge, much larger building that was approved in the minor variance. So it's two things: the sleeping cabin, which I think is going away, that's great, And the second is the size of that building. Thank you.
Mr. Allen, would you like to speak, please?
Yes, thank you. Through you. If the dwelling is enlarged to the full 600 square feet and change that coverage would allow, there would be no expansions permitted to the existing garage. It would have to stay the same footprint. However, it could be increased in height up to the 20-foot maximum as the bylaw would allow.
Okay, thank you. And at the moment, they're not looking to do anything to the garage, so my understanding. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Fauner. Any more comments? Are you good?
That's it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else care to speak in support or opposition? We got anyone waiting?
There's one person that's phoned me. Should I unmute them? Tracy Robbins.
Oh, okay. I believe we have one more person, and I missed the name. So Tracy Robinson. We're going to let you in now. Can't see her yet. Oh, here we go. Ms. Robinson, if you'd like to speak, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hello, yes,
Hi.
we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can. Please give us your address and then please go ahead.
Hi, we are at 1129 Whiteside Road, just east of the McAskins. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, no, everything's good. Please go ahead.
All right, I'm just, sorry, this is all new. Appreciate you taking my call. I'm just a little concerned that Stephen sort of came in late, and I don't think that he got the whole gist of the taking the garage off and adding on to the actual building as it stands now. We would like to be able to come back to council with this, just because I don't think that anybody was prepared for what's happened today. And there are a lot of questions around that property. So if we could defer it, we would really appreciate that, because like I said, there's been so much happen with amendments, and I don't believe that, you know, right now you said at the moment they're not planning to do anything with the garage, but that doesn't mean that they won't in the future. The layout of the properties, there's so much intertwining with the properties as they stand now, because the driveway goes right through 3 properties. So that is a huge, it's just a huge issue around the capacity that you're adding on to those, to the cottage, if they do add on to the cottage as well, because it's just not designed for the amount of people that they have there, or that the property and the frontage, like everything is divided down into the lake, and it's a very narrow lot at the lake. So going up or going back is just going to create more of an issue, I think. So I would appreciate just having some input on the future of the property. And I agree with Peter Marshall. I think that that is really important for the community. And I think Stephen, like, I would really like him to go over some of the rules, because everything has changed again, because it was one application and now it's a totally different application. So I would appreciate from the council if they just would allow us to have some more information, and them, the council, to have more information, especially since the frontage was incorrectly surveyed at 90 and it's only 79 feet. So I don't know if they would have been allowed any of those buildings that they currently have, as it's a non-building lot. And I don't know the rules, and that's why we hired Stephen. And Stephen hasn't had an opportunity to look through this new addition that they're planning. Is that fair?
So, Ms. Robinson, the only thing we have in front of us now is the actual motion that talked about the garage going up another story and the sleeping cabin. That has been taken off the table, so to speak, by the owners. So the only thing before the committee at this point is recognizing the dock and the dock port and the actual size that it is. That's it. That's all we're dealing with today. And so I think, as we said before, in terms of an addition to their cottage, if it's within all of our bylaws, it does not come to this committee because they're doing everything legally. It's just a building permit, and as I think Mr. Allen said, they check the septic and the permit is issued. So we don't deal with what might happen in the future. And if they're doing everything within the bylaw, it will not come to this committee. They have the right to do whatever the bylaw allows them to do. So I hope that maybe clarifies it for you.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say except thank you for your time, and it's unfortunate.
Well, everybody has rights, and
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Everybody does have rights. So, okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else wishing? Gary Corbett? Greg, sorry, apologies. Greg Corbett, I believe, is coming in. Don't see him yet. Mr. Corbett?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can. Welcome,
Okay.
And thank you.
Thank you very much. Greg Corbett with Planscape, 104 Kimberley Avenue, Bracebridge, Ontario, P1L 1Z8. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Jones, who are the property owners to the east. As has been indicated, we're happy to see that it has been revised as we hoped it would be. I just like to say a couple of things. One is I would concur with what Mr. Bonner had indicated is the question as to, I know it's not before you now, but the interpretation staff has taken with regards to whether that garage can be expanded. As has been indicated, I know it says they're not planning on doing it now, but if Mr. Allen had indicated at this meeting that they could put a second story addition to it, I would just question whether that is correct, or I think we would appreciate, I guess, the opportunity if it could be deferred to allow us to understand that better and what that they could do on this property. One of the questions was the fact that because that garage was granted by a minor variance, my interpretation would be that it is to be the minor variance that was granted when it's done, and that was for 720 square feet, and not a second addition and not increase it in size. So we would appreciate the opportunity, at least if, as you are dealing with a bylaw, as I believe Mr. Bonner was indicating, you do have the opportunity where you could put into in exchange for recognizing the boat port, restricting any further development on the property in terms of the garage. So with that, if I appreciate the opportunity to address you today and happy to answer any questions you have to those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corbett. Would anybody else care to speak from the public? I think we've covered everybody. Kelly, Jane?
There's just that one person on the phone that I don't know.
I don't know who it is. Okay. All right. So the applicant, we're following the rules here. Would the applicant care to rebut at all?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just saying a few things, if I may. I just like to point out, although this property is considered an undersized lot to the lot frontage, it is sort of a unique shape, whereas it's just the frontage that's sort of small in size, whereas it's small at the shoreline, and then it does get quite larger at the rear and does become like a rather decent sized lot. And it's certainly not an undersized lot due to the lot area. I just want to point that out because you know, people seem to be pointing out that this lot doesn't necessarily doesn't support development. This is my opinion that it does, and then it is also in my opinion that it does as of right, which we've sort of gone and removed the sleeping cabin portion of this, remove that from the amendment, no longer moving forward with that, and then deciding to move forward with development completely as of right. And I think as Mr. Allen pointed out, there is still a restriction on lot coverage, and we would like to put the available area towards the expansion of the cottage and focus on that. And that is all we are focusing on at this time. And then of course, getting the dock approved at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to turn to our. Okay, we have someone on the phone and we're not quite sure who it is, but would they like to speak? We have unmuted you. So it doesn't look like it. So I am going to move on to the committee and any questions. And I see Mayor Harding has had his hand up for a while.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the sleeping cabin being removed. The only one question I really do have is in the minor variance at this particular point regarding the construction of the garage A3498. What restrictions were put into that? And I'll look to Mr. Allen, I guess, to understanding that variance. Are there any specific restrictions, or could it be built up from a size perspective? And if they do a 600-foot addition to the cottage, they are going to eat up most of the lot coverage at that particular point. So just trying to understand that. Thank you.
Yep, Mr. Allen.
Thank you. Through you, I have the Committee of Adjustment decision from 1998. The application was circulated, noting a lot frontage of 95 feet, the construction of a 900 square foot garage, or sorry, 720 square foot garage. The decision itself and the resolution indicates the following. Be it resolved that application 3489 be approved to allow the construction of a garage on a lot with insufficient frontage. The reason for the decision, it was the opinion of the committee that this application is minor in nature as the proposed structure is non-habitable and well set back from the water. Committee also concurred that this application is in keeping with the intent of the bylaw and the official plan and is suitable development for the enjoyment of the property. So that's what the committee's thinking was back in 1998. It's my perspective that the existing garage that was permitted through the variance can be expanded as of right through the provisions of the zoning bylaw as stated in our report. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I compliment you on the excellent job you're doing in this new meeting, and it's working out, and I think you're handling it very well. First of all, I have no issue with the dock's exemption. Second of all, I understand the garage expansion has been withdrawn. But the point I would like to make is that I would like to take this opportunity to ask staff to come back to this committee at a future date and explain to us what criteria they use when they recommend to us approval of applications. And the reason is that, and it's not relating to this application particularly, but generally, because I think it's my sense that if this application had been left to proceed, it had not been withdrawn, it would have been rejected by this committee. And I just think we have to be on the same page. And I just like to understand how they can recommend something that's the original application, which I believe was so difficult to understand. So I'll leave it at that for today, but I'd appreciate it at some future date. We could have a wholesome discussion on what criteria staff use when they recommend things to us. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jarlowitz, I know you've been on that path before, so but that you're right, it doesn't apply today, so we'll just carry on. Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would highly recommend a deferment on this. I think the public weigh-in, the public weight, and their commentary, plus I think some of the general confusion piece. I see no reason after all the time that this file has been before various committees at the township that we couldn't defer. And I think for clarity, for additional information, perhaps even clean it up, come back, letting some of us perhaps even do site, have a look, get a better feel for this, because there does seem to be a number of trap doors here. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards?
Thank you very much. I don't have a problem with the deferral and that because there's some numbers and that come by, like 648 square feet could be added to the cottage. The applicants mentioned 900 square. So I'd like that. There was site plan control asked for replanting. It may help. I don't have a problem with the boat port and that. I would hate to see them get even the 720 square foot garage going up any higher. That's what the committee did back in 1998. So if we put site plan control on, I think we can control it. It's a very small frontage, and I think it should be looked at again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa?
Thank you. I recognize that there's challenges with the change in the application today, but I think the information that's been brought forward has been fairly clear to me, and that other questions can be answered within the next 30 days prior to this coming to council. So I would suggest that we can move this forward and address, I think both the applicant and others know what their concerns are, but I think that there will be enough time before the next meeting. And I don't believe that we should delay this. I think that those things can be addressed in the next 30 days or so.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you very much. I would agree with Councillor Nishikawa. I think we can move this forward today. The one question I would ask, and this will go actually probably to the applicant, because from the recommendations of site plan control that I agree with, we're going to get rid of 3 because of future habitable floor area. Well, that's actually the dwelling, but that would be change. I'd move this forward for the dock, but the question to the applicant would be, can we freeze the garage at this particular point? So future additions to the garage, expansions to the garage, either vertical or horizontal. And if you want some expansion, do it in the cottage based on legal rights. That's all I've heard. Everything is a concern around the garage. So if we can move this forward today by freezing the garage where it is, then I think everybody is happy.
Thank you. Mr. Muntz, would you like to answer that? Or Mr. McAskin?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, First of all, I'd just like to say I don't see the need for this to be deferred. Just because moving forward, I'm not sure what other information we would present in future meetings, because the only item we would be looking at is the dock as part of this amendment. So I don't believe there would be any more information to put forward. And again, I would just like to acknowledge that that this amendment is directed only on the dock at this point, and that the other accessory structure, the cottage, really aren't in play anymore, I would say, just because of the dock. So with that being said, I just don't really see the need to add restrictions to anything, because moving forward, everything will be constructed as of right per the bylaw. Yeah, perhaps Mr. McAskin would like to add on that as well, and Patricia, the homeowner or the cottage owner, is with them as well. She could sort of put a word in there as well, just to sort of how they feel about that. But yeah, I definitely don't see the need as part of this amendment to add any restrictions to structures on the property, due to the fact that everything that can be constructed will be as of right moving forward. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muntz. Mr. McAskin, are you there? I believe what the mayor was asking is, would you be willing to do that because the concerns of all your neighbors seem to be the garage. So the question was simply, would you be willing to freeze the garage as it is now?
My question would be, well, first off, it's just a general statement. The direction we are going and we are focused on is with the existing dwelling. We have no intention at this point to make any changes to the garage. I know Mr. Allen referenced that that we would have as of right to increase the garage the height of 20 feet. Again, that's not our intention, but we certainly are not. I guess I would have a question. What does freezing mean? Does that mean I would ask what to the council, what does freezing mean?
Yeah, it means no new construction on it. I see Mayor Harding's hand is up, so he may want to chime in on.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess for me, the freezing would be no second story and the same footprint to the garage, which would be, but I have actually a question right now, I guess, back to Mr. Allen in particular. And if we're not having to change to permit a sleeping cabin on this, we already have a bylaw in place to build the boathouse, though there were some technical issues with the boathouse, or the boat port and the dock width. If they just expand the cottage by right, doesn't all of this potentially go away? The existing bylaw to build the docks and the boathouse exist? Or why does that necessarily need to change? Mr. Allen?
Thank you. Through you, I think it's important to note that the McAskins came to the township on their own accord following the completion of a survey that revealed this frontage issue. Up until that point, the township had no idea what the actual frontage was. We don't require surveys for building permits. We don't require surveys for planning applications. So these, how many of these issues exist across the township where we've granted approvals where we don't actually have the right numbers being used is anybody's guess. So I guess that would be one point. So if this application now only includes the dock, and it was the McAskins that came forward to make the township aware about this issue with the dock, we hadn't issued any orders. We weren't aware of any compliance issues. I see it as the McAskins taking on their own accord to address a compliance issue that they became aware of. They didn't have to tell us. about this issue. They want to bring the property into compliance. Future sale, that might be important. Not to say that it is going to be for sale, but it's best to clean up all of these issues when you become aware of them and not let them linger. I can't recall the exact conversation for the pre-consultation, but it seems like the discussion related to the dock also included a part B, which was changes to the garage. So, both part A and B proceeded hand in glove, but this committee has the ability to proceed with all, none, or part of the amendment that's before you. So I hope that's clear and that it gets to the point of your question. Thank you.
If I may just tag on to Mr. Allen's comments. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
So and I want to address Mayor Harding's question directly. We do agree that these are two requests we have. One is just to clean up the dock issue. And as I mentioned earlier, we just simply weren't aware of it. And when my father passed, we did take stock of the cottage. That included a survey, and we did on our own accord come to, and we spoke with Mr. Allen. And that is really our primary goal today, is just to clean that up administratively, and so that the dock is no longer an issue. So that's our number one goal today. In terms of Mr. Harding's question of, can we freeze the garage? We would certainly entertain some language that we will not build another habitable space on the garage. Absolutely. We would be willing to do that. But we certainly don't want to lose the rights that we have as of right, as Mr. Allen had explained. So, we certainly want to work with the township to move this forward. So hopefully that's kind of a compromise that would be agreeable. And if Mr. Harding or Mayor Harding, if you have any questions, obviously we'd like to answer them.
Okay, thank you. So I am gathering, just to make sure that I'm understanding this clearly, we could on our resolution say that there will be no habitable space in the garage ever, basically. I believe that's what you said, Mr. McAskin?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, all right, committee, is that something we'd like to add to the motion? I get a show of heads. Yes, no? Everybody's frozen? It's just, okay, Councillor Edwards, I see you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you. I still have a bit of problem with the garage. It was granted as a single-story garage. It's been built. I would take the right to enlarge it either up or the side. It is definitely an undersized lot. It's right there. I don't mind them putting another 640 square feet on the cottage. There has been all the neighbors are concerned with it because, again, it's a bylaw enforcement. If they ever did put a second story on, is what goes in there. So at this point, I would not support it unless there's something done with the garage.
And with what? The garage. Well, we just.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? So I think I need again a show of, are we going to put into this motion that the garage will not have habitable space? Are we in agreement with that? You think so? I don't see anybody. Yes, yes, no, no, apparently not. So I'm only reading two people that would like to see that happen. Sorry?
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Councillor Jaglowitz?
I support Councillor Edwards' recommendation.
Okay, so I'm not sure in a technical part here, maybe either Mr. Allen or Mr. Pink can help me out here. Can we add that on at this point? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. Everyone, I guess, is clear. I think part of the confusion, I guess this is a great meeting to have our first trial run at a public meeting. I think some of the confusion stems from the lack of detail that was put in decisions when you go back to 1998. And as much as in the background, committee was aware that they thought there was 90 or 95 feet of frontage, the decisions of both the bylaw 98 and the variance around the same time are not very specific as we would do today. And hence there's some additional development rights. The minor variance decision at the end of the day simply states that a garage is allowed on an undersized lot. The bylaw also says that a dock and a boatport are allowed on an undersized lot. So a survey has since been done that's clarified that the frontage was actually much less than what council and committee thought of the day, but the bylaws didn't tie them to those numbers, didn't tie them to a single story, didn't tie them to a footprint, didn't tie them to a frontage measurement as we would do today. Hence, I think Mr. Allen was completely correct. The McAskins on their own accord have had a survey, realized the frontage was much less, and the width of the dock is really the only issue that's before you today. That's the only non-compliance, and no one seems to have a concern with that. I think further to the mayor's earlier question, the bylaw, we're actually proposing the old bylaw to be repealed because it's no longer needed. The structures have been built. They become legal non-complying, and we're proposing to repeal them. When it comes to the garage, of course, the applications in front of you, committee can choose a number of options, whether to limit a second story, limit the footprint, limit habitable space, or leave it open. That's at your discretion. What I would note is, as much as we can prohibit habitable space in it, I would just like to point out that the parent zoning bylaw already does that. Because it's an undersized lot, they can't add habitable space. That was why they were here in the first place. They've removed that request. So to add it now in the bylaw again that you can't do it is largely moot. The zoning bylaw won't let them do that. Now you can make that abundantly clear and add it in this site-specific bylaw again. That's fine, that's your discretion. But I just wanted to clarify that the zoning bylaw 2014-14 would not allow habitable space in that garage because there's only the less than 100 feet of frontage. The one item, I have the resolution, I haven't marked anything up because the discussion keeps going around and I don't want to mark up a resolution until I know what planning committee agrees on. The one thing that I'm unclear on is the site plan condition, whether there's still a desire to impose site plan control to legalize the docks, in which case staff can look at additional plantings on the property. I believe that was raised by some neighbors. And then ultimately the decision seems like on the garage is what's outstanding, whether you wish to limit an expansion of the footprint or an expansion of the second story or an expansion of habitable area or all three. In my mind, if their desire is to expand the cottage, any expansion of the cottage is going to eat into what they can expand on the garage because of lot coverage. The neighbors may actually prefer a slightly larger garage than a slightly larger cottage. So sometimes putting added restrictions in place are not beneficial because it ties everyone's hands. So those are my comments. Hopefully they help in the discussion. Happy to amend the resolution as committee directs.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. Mayor Harding, you'd like to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question may be not answered. If this whole thing goes away, we defer all this stuff, or this didn't come. As of right, because there's a bylaw on the property today that's not very clear that allows for the existing boathouse or boat port and docks. So if they came and applied for a building permit to expand the cottage based on lot coverage, we would be giving it to them, I believe. There's nothing stopping them from going forward. So I hate to say this. I mean, the McAskins have come and said, hey, we want to try and rectify some stuff. We want to make sure it's a little more detailed, a little more specific, especially regarding the boathouse. They're getting rid of the second accommodation because they're going to put it back in. And now we're trying to take away overall property rights. And I have a bigger issue with that, to be honest with you. And, you know, I appreciate they've gone through time and effort to legalize the boat port and the docks. I believe we should be providing them with that today. And anything else, again, if they're not willing to, you know, shrink the boat, the garage, or freeze it at that height, as Mr. Pink says, they're going to take up lot coverage already by expanding the cottage to live. So I appreciate we want to do more here, and you know, site plan for a something that's already built 20 years ago. We're just imposing costs and money and stuff like that. Here's somebody who's come to us to say, hey, we've realized something, we want to try and make it right, and we're adding a bunch of other complications. I appreciate the neighbors' concerns, but you know, this was done 20 years ago to allow everything. And if he didn't come to rectify the boat port, if he'd have come in and just said, I want to build an addition to the cottage, this wouldn't be before us. So those are my comments as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to try to, and I probably should let the public know that there's no further input from the public at this point. We are debating among ourselves. So in terms of site plan control, do we want that on? No? I think my screen is freezing, so I'm having a hard time seeing this.
5. At least, well, 5 of them are saying no.
No site plan control, and thank you. Yeah. Okay, and then I believe, as Mayor Harding said, we just strictly move ahead with the approval of what's there now and leave the garage out of it. So, but I again need some input on that. And my screen is frozen again, Madam Clerk. So.
Okay, so you're asking, I've got.
So everybody's okay, but
So no to site plan?
no to site plan.
No site plan.
And then we are also not even going to have the garage as part of this. So it's very, it's going back to very simple, I think, so. Okay, so Mr. Pink is just going to redo that motion, and I'm going to suggest, because it's 10:30, that we take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes and we'll deal with the motion then. Thank you. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Have we got everybody back now, I think? Okay, so I'm going to read this motion then. It is moved by Mayor Harding. Who are we missing? Okay. Councillor Zavitz, can you hear me? No. It's not. Okay, well, I think we're missing Councillor Zavitz. I would like to, Madam Clerk, should we wait? Oh, here he comes. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to read this motion moved by Mayor Harding, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved, Planning Committee recommend to the Township Council that zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA-7/20 McAskin roll number 6-22-060 be approved to recognize the existing dock width only, subject to the following condition. Future dock additions are prohibited. Any discussion? Check that out. All right. Okay. Did we vote? Those in favor? Two, six. Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, we are going to now move to our next application pool, and I believe that Mr. Allen, this is yours again. Please take us through it.
Thank you. This next item is a public meeting in the name of Poole. Excuse me while I just switch between my two screens. This application number is ZBA 1020. The lands are known municipally as 1030 Dock Road and are presently in the ownership of Marion and Gary Poole. The committee may recall this property. In 2019, a bylaw amendment was approved to permit a second sleeping cabin on the property. Through the review of this application, it was determined that the lot is within 500 meters of a non-municipal, non-operating landfill site, and a D4 assessment was therefore required and a hold zone was added to the property. The applicant has now submitted an application to lift the hold. They have completed a D4 assessment. Azimuth Environmental Consulting has prepared a D4 study and concludes that there's no meaningful risk created by the former landfill site and no further evaluation is warranted. Staff are recommending approval of this application. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is the applicant or applicant's agent here to speak? Sorry, who is it? Oh, okay, Mr. Fauner. I believe you're on again. There he is. Okay.
Yes, good morning once again. Can you hear me? Thank you very much again for this opportunity. This is a lifting of a holding zone, which I'm hoping will be fairly straightforward. This application on Lake Rosso was one you may recall. It was to permit an additional sleeping cabin where there were 4 habitable buildings on the property. And they're going to be removing one of them basically as compensation, if you will. Anyways, what happened during the process is that it was determined that this was within 500 meters of an old landfill site. So a D4 assessment was required. One was done by Azimuth. It was completed January of this year and concluded that basically that old landfill site will not have any impact on this proposal. And Azimuth has done others in the area and based on this same old landfill site and have come to the same conclusion. My only point I want to make is I know that staff put forward the possibility of the peer review. I would suggest in this case, partly because Azimuth has done a number of studies and come up with the same conclusions in this area, that a peer review is not necessary. So those are all my comments, and I hope that committee recommends approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fauner. Are those anybody who would like to speak in support of this application from the public? I'm seeing no. Anyone who would like to speak in opposition? No. Okay, we don't have any of that, so no need for you to speak again then, I don't think, Mr. Fauner, and I'm going to turn it over to the committee to see if there are any questions, comments. Okay, I don't see any, so I'm simply going to read the motion. Moved by Councillor Jaglowitz, seconded by Councillor Kelly. Be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend to Township Council that ZBA-10/20 Poole roll number 2-5-073 be approved.
Sir, do you want to just ask the phone number if that's what it is? We don't know who that is.
Are we asking the phone number again?
Yeah, just unmuted.
Well, whoever's on the phone and is unmuted, would you mind identifying yourself, please? Okay, we have a silent listener here.
Well, my phone just said I'm unmuted. It's Peter Quattro, but I haven't touched anything. So whatever is happening is from your end.
Okay, thank you. You'll be up, I believe, shortly. So.
Oh no, that's
Okay,
fine.
so
That's fine.
yeah, thank you. We just didn't know who it was because we couldn't see anything but a telephone number from this end. So I read the motion. I don't believe there's any comments. Those in favor? Okay, my screen is frozen again. Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so now we are into, I believe, our site plans, plan of subdivision and condominium. And this, again, Mr. Allen, I believe you're up to take us through this for the Port Carling Inn.
Thank you. This next item is an amending site plan agreement, application SPA 1320. The property is at 4 Armstrong Point Road in Port Carling, and the owner is Port Carling Inn Developments Incorporated. The amending site plan agreement specifically proposes to construct a 2-story boathouse with accommodation unit on the 2nd floor and reconfigure a portion of the existing docks. You'll find site plan drawings on page 71 and enlargements on 72, showing the dock and boathouse layout as well as floor plans. The staff report on page 66 of your agenda package has a comparison between the previous site plan agreement that was proposed for the dock and boathouse layout. That was site plan agreement 5111, 2011. Specifically, in terms of the numbers that are attached to the proposal, the proposed first story of the boathouse will be 1,743 square feet. The 2nd story accommodation unit will be 956 square feet. The proposal complies with the requirements of the zoning bylaw amendment. I would note that one of the primary differences, other than a change from a 1-story boathouse to a 2-story boathouse from the 2011 approval, is in 2011 there was a portion of some existing docks that encroached into the 15-foot side yard setback. Those docks are now proposed to remain and be reconstructed as of right. Staff have recommended approval conditional upon the existing lighting details being, or excuse me, for the exterior lighting details being provided for the proposed boathouse, and the existing fixtures located on the existing development be brought into compliance with the dark sky bylaw. During the site inspection, staff observed the number of exterior fixtures that were non-compliant. I provided some photos of those in the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. So would the applicant or agent care to speak? And I believe, is that Mr. Quattro that was on the phone? Zimmer? Both of them? Oh, all right. So
It was Nathan Zimmer that used it. That's-
Okay, I believe Mr. Zimmer, if you'd like to take the floor. You'll have to unmute yourself, Mr. Zimmer.
Hi there. Good morning. My name is Nathan Zimmer. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Just speak quite a little bit louder, please.
Okay. I am 36 Yonge Street South, Huntsville, P1H1B1. I am representing the owner of the subject property and work for Duncan Ross Architect. Thank you, Chair Bridgeman and Planning Committee members. We're asking to amend the current site plan agreement for Carling Inn. We have proposed a two-story boathouse to replace the previously approved one-story boathouse and dock modifications. As outlined in the staff report, the proposed changes are in compliance with the zoning bylaw and are in line with urban center designation policy. As shown on the proposed drawings, the boathouse has been moved to the south, and the setback from the north property line has been increased from 19 foot to 32 feet. This change brought the two-story boathouse into compliance and lessened the visual impact from the neighboring property to the north. We have located the sun deck on the south side of the boathouse in an effort to reduce noise impact on the neighboring property. We have revised the floating dock layout and are maintaining existing crib docking. The docking changes provide easier access for boats to enter and leave the docking area safely. All new docks will be on existing cribs or floating docks, which reduces the impact to fish habitat. The majority of the new docking has been installed and the new boathouse will be constructed on the existing docks, which reduce the amount of construction in contact with the water and limits any impact to the lake health. The rest of the site remains the same as previously approved, and proposed changes would not change any of the required heritage attributes. All heritage attributes required by the previous site plan agreements have been maintained. The heritage attributes were related to the original portion of the building that was torn down and rebuilt. The boathouse is not located in front of this original portion of the building and therefore would not affect the required unobstructed view. The boathouse is located in front of the 6-unit commercial building, which was not designated as a heritage building. Our client is committed to having the building lighting be compliant with the town's dark sky friendly requirements and will submit lighting fixture specs to the town for approval. It is exciting to see the Port Carling Inn so close to completion, and we hope you can support our application for the revised boathouse and dock design. Thank you. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Would anyone like to speak on behalf of this application? We have anybody waiting? Oh, Mr. Quattro? Oh. Okay, you can speak, Mr.
Oh, no, that's fine. I think Nathan has covered it all. I wasn't planning on speaking, only to answer questions if needed.
Okay, that's great. Then in that case, then anyone in opposition? Do we have anybody waiting to speak on this? No. Okay. So, well, that's fine. Then I'm going to turn it over to our committee for any questions, any thoughts. I see Councillor Jaglowitz has a question or thought.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question and I have kind of a comment. I'm reading the information, and as the property to the south, which is a residential condominiums, is that part of this overall project, and that's how we get to the 50-50? And then the building to the north, is that all totally resort units with the exception of this one? And when we talk about resort units, does that mean that those are truly only available to the traveling and public, or are these condominium units that there are owners? Just trying to understand the makeup of what this whole project is.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, would you be able to answer that?
Sure.
Through you, there is a prior zoning and bylaw amendment on this property that effectively joins the multi-unit residential building with the resort operation. So they're effectively treated as one lot for planning purposes. To your point, that is how they're getting to the 50% mix. It's also, parking and all of the requirements are satisfied across the two lots jointly. So that's one of the effects of joining the two lots together as one for planning purposes. The resort side of the property is not part of the condominium as the multi-residential piece would be. The expectation is that this accommodation unit would be available to the traveling and vacationing public. I believe, and I don't have the wording in front of me right now, but I believe we had a past site plan agreement that specifically had provisions to deal with that exact issue to ensure that these units weren't residential units and that they were intended to be used for commercial purposes only. Mr. Pink may have a greater understanding as he was involved with the past agreements that would have included that requirement. But nevertheless, similar to any other resort, if the resort unit is not used for traveling and vacationing public, that would be an enforcement issue.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Pink, would you like to chime in?
No, I think Mr. Allen summed it up very well. I was involved. It feels like a distant memory now, but those units on the northern half obviously did not go through condominium approval, but they did go through a site plan process, and council of the day treated it somewhat similarly and put in requirements. I believe there's somewhat of an informal business plan actually in the site plan to ensure that those units remain available to the traveling and vacationing public. Hope that helps provide some further background.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure if Mr. Allen or Mr. Pink, potentially from a history perspective, and it's challenging my brain because this goes back to probably 10 years now that we've been dealing with this. And the one aspect that I read in the report that we've granted a reduction in the restaurant component, but I've yet to see a commercial aspect of this development from a restaurant and amenities type of thing available to the general public. I haven't walked through the building recently. I was on the docks about a week or so ago. But I don't know, the old Eileen's, I think, was the restaurant at the time. I don't see any of that commercial aspect to this property at this particular point. And I'm just a little bit concerned about putting more residential without ensuring the commercial. Just maybe somebody can help me that the commercial does exist there.
Mr. Allen? I'm not sure who can help you with this. Mr. Allen?
Thank you. Through you. I have not been inside the building and I have not been a customer. So I would defer to Mr. Quattro and Mr. Zimmer specifically about the use of the property itself. But I think the one thing that is important to keep in mind is that the proposed unit will be a commercial unit. It will be related as to the resort and not the multi-residential. It is an accommodation unit. An accommodation unit can include a kitchen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One of you like to answer?
It's Peter Quattro. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, let me elaborate. So the condos on the south side are privately owned. That's really not part of our hotel. And as we speak, we have the waterfront completed with kayaks and everything that goes with it. And if you look at my booking schedule, you'll see that we've been almost full for the last number of weeks. And this is all on all for the traveling public. We do have folks that have taken multiple months, up to 12 months. But again, it's all on a rental basis. We charge on a per day basis or a per week or per month basis. So that explains. And I do welcome council. Mayor Hardy, I did want to reach out to you and have you visit the site. I'll gladly take everyone through, and you can see exactly what the amenities are. The restaurant component is still sitting. That's the last piece that we will be working on. And I haven't, quite frankly, found a restaurateur who's going to jump in, especially this year. But the intent is that by spring, we should have someone lined up for the restaurant that is down there. The deck and the restaurant is all, excuse me, ready to go. We certainly have done everything from a building department standpoint to move forward with the restaurant. The elevator's commissioned, and so it is an operating hotel resort with limited amenities. I mean, we don't rent out equipment. We have kayaks and boards and swimming apparatus that is free for our guests. So, and a site visit is probably the best way to qualify what it is, and we are, as I believe, 99% complete. Does that help?
Okay, yep, thank you very much. Yes, thank you. And I believe that Director Pink would like to comment.
Thank you. Just further to Mr. Allen's comments and Mr. Quattro's, just in response to the mayor's question, just so the council is very clear, a restaurant always was on the property, and it is proposed by the current owner, and it is allowed by the zoning, but it's not required. They're not required to have a restaurant as long as one of the permitted uses is a hotel or a resort. As long as those units are available to the traveling and vacationing public, they're in compliance with the zoning bylaw with respect to use. Certainly a restaurant seems to be proposed, but I just don't want to give the impression that the restaurant is a requirement per se. Just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes?
Yes, through you. This is a heritage property, and one of the conditions of the heritage was the unobstructed view. And I believe that this should be reviewed by the Heritage Committee before we go further with this. So I would like to recommend that it be deferred until Heritage can take a look at it and give their comments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa?
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, mostly because I'm, I guess, silly enough to have the old reports from 2005 and then again through to 2011. I wanted to address the heritage aspect. Respectfully to our Heritage Committee, back in 2011 and 12, in that time frame, we dropped the ball big time. And we didn't follow through with recommendations that had been brought forward. The applicant at the time, I believe, tried his best to work with us. I don't believe that it actually fits into some of those requirements that we had in the past. My concerns or questions to Mr. Pink are, have we satisfied, because I just have pages and pages of requests and requirements over the years. So some of my concerns are not fully understanding about the boardwalk and connecting, if we are happy with what's been done there, because that was a big concern back at the time. And also, well, I did note back in 2011 that we would say that there would be no dwelling unit allowed in the boathouse, and I understand that that's what we're being asked today. I'm just concerned that a number of people had mentioned this and may not be aware of what's being applied for at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Pink?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I guess just to start, I believe the prohibition on a dwelling in the boathouse is the small boathouse on the other side of the property that's actually attached by a water lot in front of the residential condominium. And that was the boathouse in question that was, I believe, falling apart at the time and did come forward to be replaced, and the heritage aspects were discussed. It was permitted to be replicated, but there was a prohibition on a dwelling because apparently, I don't believe one previously existed there. It was to be a unit or non-habitable use. I think to say that there is a lengthy, extensive heritage history and planning history of this property is a gross understatement. And I wouldn't say that I have every detail off the top of my head right now, but my recollection is the property was actually designated under the Heritage Act as somewhat of a tool used by the municipality or council of the time to control how the building would be reconstructed. However, it was permitted as soon as council designated. They did also permit a request for its demolition and replacement and use the site plan process to ensure that certain features were replicated. And I do know more recently, during the reconstruction, the applicants and their agents did not replicate everything precisely as was required. They did go before our Heritage Committee and a more recent term of council and did have lengthy discussions, and there were some compromises made. If there still are outstanding issues and features that were not replicated, that is still an ongoing enforcement issue. And again, I'd have to refresh my memory on the details if certain things haven't been addressed yet by the owners. But further to Councillor Hayes' comments, that's a very excellent point that Mr. Allen noted in the report. One of the conditions is an unobstructed view from the water, obviously a bit subjective, but if this planning committee wishes to refer that aspect to our Heritage Committee for discussion, we are happy to defer and send this matter to the Heritage Committee, at which point they did meet once in this new world we live in. I'm sure we can meet again and bring that matter back to Planning Committee if that's the will of Planning Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards?
Thank you very much. Two things. First of all, I think maybe it should go back to the Heritage Committee, and that I would support that. And I was just interested when they were saying about a 12-month rental. They rent by the day, by the week, by the month, and they have some. I thought he said a 12-month rental. How does that work? Is that person then living there full time? I would just like an answer to that.
Hi, Peter Quattro. Yeah, we do allow people to rent for as long as they want to, and they are back and forth. And if they're here full time, that's possible too. But it is under the same guidelines and the restrictions of the hotel.
So, Councillor Edwards, do you want to follow up to that or not?
No, that's fine. And that it was just mentioned, and I just wondered how it was handled. So they pay monthly, and that's fine. Okay, thank you.
We have a combination of that, and we have folks that pay us weekly and every 2 weeks. We have others that commit longer term, as basically they're using it as their summer retreat, or if they're local, they're using it as a place for summers, and they go elsewhere in winters.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Yes, thank you. I have two issues. One, I support this being deferred and referred to the Heritage Committee. And I also would like, if that's possible, through you to Mr. Quattro, if you are going to do a site visit with the mayor, I'd like to be included in that if that is possible. It's Frank Jaglowitz. Thank you.
And absolutely, and I welcome all of the councillors. Actually, it's now if I can comment on the heritage, I believe we satisfied all of the heritage requirements that since I've been involved the last 3 or 4 years in the rebuild to get this completed. And the boathouse that we are speaking of now is on the north end of the property, not in front of the heritage component of our site. So it's, I believe Mr. Zimmer pointed that out earlier. And I do welcome, my concern is that, you know, we don't drag it out. We've been waiting since last fall to actually review this. And so I'd like to come to end. If you do visit, we can take a physical look at it so you can judge yourself as to whether it is something that's going to be affected or at least governed under heritage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa?
Madam Chair, can you put me on the list? My hands up button seems to have been eliminated. I don't think it's a mistake.
Oh dear. Councillor Nishikawa, I had you as a hand up, but I see it down now, so I'm going to go to Councillor Kelly.
Oh, thank you very much. I wanted just to follow up on Councillor Edwards' question. I'm confused about when a series of monthly or weekly or daily visits that add up to 12 months crosses the line into a residential arrangement and no longer becomes available for the traveling public. And I don't know who I'm asking that of. I just don't know the answer to that.
Whoops, Mr. Pink, would you care to respond?
Thank you. I noted Mr. Quattro's response very closely too, and I'll be honest, I'm quite concerned with the response I heard. That would certainly apply to me as a residential use of the property. Again, I'd have to refresh my memory of the exact details of the site plan and the business plan that was inserted in it, but our zoning bylaw is very clear that these units are to be made available to the traveling public, not as summer retreats or long-term rentals or 12-month rentals. That would, in my opinion, be a residential use. So that's a significant issue that I think staff are now going to have to address with the property owner and their agents. I get the sense a few councillors have suggested a deferral for the Heritage Committee. Certainly during that deferral, staff will be speaking with the agents about the use of the property as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zimmer?
Yeah, I'd just like to just to comment on the Heritage Committee aspects. We have met with the Heritage Committee multiple times, and this site plan amendment would abide with all the heritage attributes that were approved under the application. So no change from a heritage standpoint has been made. We've increased the boathouse from 1-story to a 2-story, but as I earlier mentioned, that's located in front of a separate portion of the building that was never designated as heritage. And my understanding was that when the building was demolished, it was no longer, wasn't designated as a heritage building at that point. So it was only the aspects related to the site plan agreement that were, needed to, be maintained, which we've done under this current application. So I don't see a need to review the heritage attributes. We've previously agreed on those and they haven't changed. So at this point, it should be just an enforcement. And, if people do a walkabout on the property, we can review those attributes and decide if they need to be improved or not, but I don't think it should hold up to this application.
Thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you very much. I guess my comments in this particular case, and I appreciate that we want to review this back with Heritage Committee. I also appreciate COVID has put a huge pause on any development on everybody, that we're 3, 4, 5 months behind right now. And we struggle through, this is our 3rd application today. We're at a little over 2 hours right now. I'm wondering whether or not potentially we can move this forward with heritage input between now and council. Staff have recommended approval of this. We want to make sure that the heritage features are done. Some councillors may want to go by and visit the property and understand. And I just, as opposed to deferring this back to get heritage comments back to planning committee, again, we're all 10 people sitting around this table. So could we or could we not potentially have the heritage chime in and some additional information when this comes to council in 30 days to potentially get this moving forward? That would be my recommendation, that we approve this. Planning committee approves it, but we make notes in the minutes that the additional information comes back to council for a final vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes, as chair of the committee, are you good with that?
I believe we could probably have a meeting in between now and council and have a report for council at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Nishikawa's hand is up.
Thank you. My question would be to David, and I'm a little bit concerned that we are satisfied about the parking situation at this location. And again, it sounds like we're kind of adding another residence and the possibility of another car or two or whatever. Just knowing over the years, there's been quite a struggle in that particular location.
I don't believe the parking is on the table right now, but would you like to comment, Mr. Pink?
Thank you. There is a lengthy parking analysis, I believe, in the staff report by Mr. Allen, and he can speak further to it, but we have reviewed the parking requirements because there is technically an additional unit being proposed now above the boathouse. And I believe, yes, parking is very tight, but it does meet our bylaw requirements. Further to the previous comments on heritage, I'm all for facilitating an efficient movement through the process. But just keep in mind that the Heritage Committee speaks through Planning Committee, and also what happens is the minutes are forwarded to you after the next meeting. So we meet, and then minutes are approved at the following meeting, and that's when they're forwarded to Planning Committee. So as long as council is comfortable that it would be more of a verbal update for myself as to what was discussed and not a formal set of minutes before you, then we can try to accommodate that if the Heritage Committee can meet before August of council.
Okay, so I would guess that we would be fine with a verbal report, and that we can move this forward with that report coming to us at the time of council. Our next council meeting. So I am going to read this motion by Councillor Mazan, seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. Be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Township Council that SPA-13/20 Port Carling Inn Development Limited roll number 5-5-048 be approved, conditional and satisfactory exterior lighting details being provided and existing lighting fixtures being brought into compliance with the dark sky bylaw. Any discussion, councillors? Well, then I will call a vote. All of, oh, it's not coming up. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Councillor Edwards?
Yes, I think something should be added to that, and that with regards to the heritage report.
So would you mind repeating that? I had my speaker turned off.
Okay, sorry. And that I'd like to see something on there and that with the heritage and that report as well. I don't know how David would like to phrase that, but a report from the Heritage Committee as well, since we're moving this forward so fast.
It's either in the minutes.
It would be in the minutes, Councillor Edwards. Would that satisfy you? Yeah, we could put it on. Okay.
Yeah, I think we should put it on. Then it's very clear.
Right, okay. Yes. So Councillor Mazan and Nishikawa, you are good with adding this into the motion because you are the mover and seconder? Are they nodding yes? My screen is frozen again. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let me just.
Could you repeat that?
Oh, no, I just said, you're the seconder, so you are okay with us adding on that satisfactory comments being received from the Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee as part of the motion? See, okay, great. So I'm not sure whether I need to reread this, so I will. Be it resolved that Planning Committee recommended Township Council that SPA-14/20 Port Carling Inn Developments Limited, roll number 5-5-048, be approved conditional on satisfactory exterior lighting details being provided and existing lighting fixtures being brought into compliance with the dark sky bylaw and satisfactory comments being received from the Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee. Any discussion? Then I will ask for a vote. All in favor? Okay, my screen is frozen again. We're good? Okay, thank you. That is carried. Okay. So speaking of the Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee, we have the minutes here. Is everybody good with the minutes? Councillor Hayes, would you like to?
Just something that has happened since the last set of minutes. I've been in touch with the Habitat for Humanity. They came and made a presentation, and they're part of our attainable housing group. And they had proposed a 2 rental units in Bala be developed. And our committee said that they would rather that they be developed as ownership models rather than rental models. At the current time, there's no funding available for ownership models, but there may be some money available for rental. So they are looking at that. And I just wanted to reiterate that in the rental models for Habitat for Humanity, the rental model goes on for 20 years. At the end of that 20 years, every cent that that person has paid in rent goes towards the down payment, should they wish to purchase the unit. So that's where we are right there. We're still at the information gathering point, but I just wanted to bring council or committee up to date on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're receiving the minutes. Everybody else is okay with that? Okay, thank you. So we will move on now to new business, and that would be a discussion on commenting on tourist resort condominium applications. And I actually talked to Mr. Pink about this before COVID hit and said next planning committee meeting, and here we are. Just as a discussion, because what I wanted to do is make sure that we get this minuted and that we talk about the fact that in the past, when the district has asked for comments, we have, my understanding, traditionally said, we'll wait until we see the condominium agreement. So I had suggested to Mr. Pink that instead, when we are first asked for comments, we let them know that we basically want the conditions that were put into the Mist and Villas condominium agreements that were out of the LPAT hearing that we discussed at, I think, our last council meeting, actually, when we approved those contracts. So that is what I wanted to talk about. And then I had actually said to Mr. Pink, what about a motion or a resolution saying this is what we want in the agreements? But as Mr. Pink pointed out, that doesn't give us any flexibility at that part. And if we wanted to add anything more, we could have that come back and haunt us. So I didn't know if anybody else had any comments. I just wanted to make sure that our constituents know that that is going to be what we're doing going forward. And so that the district knows right up front that these are the conditions that we would like to have put in, and our planning staff will massage those conditions depending on the application. So I see Councillor Jaglowitz has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad you brought this up. I agree with you. I think this is important. And with committee's permission, I'd like to be allowed to submit to staff a suggestion of the type of conditions we'd like to see, and be able to submit it to them for their consideration and have it come forward to a planning committee meeting for discussion, so that we're prepared when one comes forward as to how we might deal with this matter. Thank you.
If I could ask Councillor Jaglowitz for a little bit more clarity on that, because I think what we've said is the conditions that Miston Villa had. You want a more fulsome discussion on that, do you?
No, what I think we're saying the same thing, Madam Chair. I believe we are. I just would like this committee's permission to submit to staff, to Mr. Pink in particular, my interpretation of what that is, and then he can take that and bring it forward to the committee for a discussion, rather than waiting until an application comes before us. That, if that is okay. If not, that's okay too.
I'm quite honestly, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for. Until we get an application, we're not going to be commenting. And the conditions that we put in Miston Villa are now sort of tabled as those are our toolboxes that we would use. So just help me a little bit.
All right, I'll withdraw my request and I'll just do it unofficially. If that's fair. I'll just, I just think it's an important subject, and it should come back to this committee. So I'm happy to deal with staff on it if they think it's appropriate to bring it back. If not, then I'll
Nope, that's fine. We'll have lots more comments coming in. So we'll see. Councillor Mazan.
Thank you. Similar to Councillor Kelly, I think I've had my hand removed. I don't know what this new text is, so sorry about that. I just I'm seeking clarity, and please help me understand if this is what the conversation is really about. With Miston Villa, we were able to isolate some additional conditions in the final stages of that. I think there were 7 of them, 7 to 9. Are these the conditions that we're talking about? And are we saying that we would like to have a laundry list of conditions that for every condominium application, that these would be the criteria or the conditions that we are comfortable with? Is that point number 1? And point number 2 is what we're talking, or is what I'm hearing from Mr. Pink, Director Pink, that maybe we want to be careful about having such a comprehensive list. I guess I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding the context of this conversation.
Thank you. I do have the list of items that were part of the Miston Villa contract, but I'm going to let Mr. Pink speak.
I think to answer your initial question, yes, I believe that is the discussion item that the chair wishes to discuss, and she has that list in front if you wish to refresh your memory. The second point, I'm not saying that there's some great concern. Just, I guess the devil's in the details. Sometimes passing a formal resolution stating a stance or a position isn't always going to be the most helpful down the road. It's a bit unusual to sort of preemptively put in a resolution what we're going to comment on future applications. Let's see those future applications and provide appropriate comments accordingly. I think a discussion is great. I'm very interested to hear, if Councillor Jagowitz has additional suggestions. My only concern that I noted to Chair Bridgeman in the break was you just want to be very careful that you're not tying your hands. There may be future requests where you don't want to impose some things, and there may be future requests where you want to impose additional things. Sometimes passing a formal resolution saying this is our position might just tie your hands more than you wish to be. But it all would depend on how it's worded. I see no harm whatsoever, and I think it's beneficial for us to have this discussion now. Planners have over the years as to what additional things we can put in agreements to ensure that these condominiums are commercial. So we're very open to suggestions and ideas. And I think if it's noted in the minutes, that's a very clear direction to the development community and also the public at large that this council takes the issue seriously and will be looking to impose strict and appropriate requirements if future applications come forward. Hopefully that helps clarify a little bit, I believe, on today's discussion.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to read through these conditions? Would that be helpful?
I think having them.
Anybody saying yes, no, maybe?
I don't know if we need, personally, as a supplemental, I'm not
well,
sure if I need.
Let Councillor Edwards speak.
Sorry.
I think it wouldn't hurt to have a discussion on this, Madam Chair. And I think we could add some things to our wish list. And that, so then when condominium agreements do come in, we can add them or subtract them, because as we said today, a 12-month rental to me it's an apartment building rather than a tourist thing. One of the things I had thought of, and I will send my comments through, was you cannot have a driver's license to that address or a vehicle, because with the way I believe our laws are, you have to have a home address. So if they're using it as a home address, then it's a residence. So just things like that. But I think we should discuss it at a future date and see, because I'm sure that other councillors may have some wishes to put in, and that way we could actually discuss them. But I'm not saying it should be written in stone at this point, but we should be looking at different alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe I would suggest that anybody who has any thoughts like Councillor Edwards, direct them to Director Pink, and we'll put it on the agenda for our next planning committee meeting. And then we'll be able to have I was really just introducing it today to highlight it, because I think we need to do this. And then we can have a better discussion later. And I see Mayor Harding, you would like to speak?
Thank you. That was going to be my suggestion. I think, that Director Pink can probably, even in their next planning meeting, create a staff report that these are some of the conditions that we would recommend, not limiting ourselves to just those that they must all have. But as we evaluate applications, we will be evaluating under these kinds of criteria. Councillor Jagowitz can add comments to there, and everybody, Councillor Edwards, from a driver's license perspective. By the way, you can't have a vehicle registered to an address unless your driver's license is there. So I think the driver's license probably covers it off. And anyway, so I think it would be nice just for our director to kind of put a broad spectrum framework to be considered, and then we can all chime in on that at the next meeting.
Sounds good. Councillor Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I put the hand up for my colleague, Councillor Mazin. She wants to speak.
Sorry, Councillor Mazan, go ahead.
I don't think I did, but thank you for, I was actually doing a supplemental, but that's subsequently been taken care of through our conversation with Councillor Edwards and Mayor Harding. So thank you. But it is a technical thing for the next time we do this. It is difficult when you can't put your hand up. So just as an aside, but thank you.
Councilor Zavitz had his hand up before, and I don't know.
Oh, Councillor Zavitz, I did see it on the screen, but then I'm not sure whether you took it off or whether it just disappeared.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just the comment. I think the word is boilerplate. And again, so I totally subscribe to the mayor's theory that for next time, David visits that as a staff piece and we have a look at it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Anyone else? Oh, Mr. Pink, you wanted to speak?
No, I was just testing to make sure the hand works.
Oh, Mr. Pink's hand works. Okay. All right, so we'll discuss that further at the next meeting. So I believe that's the end of our agenda. Just let me, what?
I just quickly touched on the last.
Oh, the LPAT. Okay, and
I don't know if anyone else has any.
any other, yes, it's true. Any other new business coming forward today? Okay, then I think, Mr. Pink, you can take it away with LPAT status, etc.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you note, standard on our agenda packages now is just a link to the ongoing LPAT matters we have, just an open discussion if any councillors had any questions about ongoing files or recent submissions. I'll just quickly go through some of the more recent activity. There was a minor variance appeal in the name of Men's and Archer. It was a fairly straightforward minor variance for a side yard setback for a sauna. Neighboring owner had some concerns and the Committee of Adjustment turned that down. Property owner appealed that decision, and more recently the property owner withdrew that appeal. So that's always nice. That one has gone away. Some councillors may recall, although I believe this is a previous term of council, there was a severance application and related zoning bylaw amendment on Ricketts Lake in the name of D. Facendus. Those applications were still being deferred. No decision had been made by committee and council. The property owner has now recently submitted appeals to those due to a lack of decision under the required timelines. And I think one of the more, obviously a lot of LPAT matters have been on hold due to the coronavirus, although I guess I can take this opportunity to let council know that LPAT is now starting to have digital hearings as we're having now. Actually, the Bala Bay Inn hearing is going on as we speak at this very moment. I believe it's turned into a 5-day hearing from what I've heard. Started on Monday, and the hope is to wrap up tomorrow. But in general, most of LPAT matters were on hold there for a number of months, so there's not too much to update. But I believe also the Legacy Cottages condominium LPAT decision was released since we've last met as a planning committee. So I'd be remiss, I think, not to mention that decision came in, and I believe the chair wanted perhaps something to say about that in the past, or if committees had any questions about that. Those are the LPAT matters that come to my mind that have come up in the last few weeks and months. Happy to answer any questions on those.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pink. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Mr. Pink. Thank you for that update. That's very helpful. I find that very helpful. One question, and you probably don't have the answer, but I wonder if you could get back to us. Yes, the legacy decision has been issued, but because of the coronavirus, I understand the appeal period is not expired. Is there some way of finding out what the actual expiry date for that appeal period will be? And I appreciate if you don't know the answer today, but I'd appreciate knowing. I've been unable to get a concrete answer to that.
Mr. Pink?
Thank you. The answer I received from the LPAT staff member, and they did investigate that for me, was although I believe the legislation has put that 30-day deadline on pause to review an LPAT decision, the Tribunal would expect that any request for review would be accompanied with a lengthy submission detailing why they could not meet the 30-day timeline. And it's not necessarily, I guess the impression I got, I don't think we're going to get anything in writing, but in speaking with them verbally, the impression I got was they would still like to generally hold to the 30 limit timeline. However, they acknowledge that the emergency orders by the province have paused those, but they would expect any lawyer to submit and outline why that 30-day timeline could not have been met, what the hardship was, and it will be at the discretion of the tribunal whether they would accept those answers and consider it a valid request for review or not. So unfortunately not I guess a straight answer, but that's the answer we've been given. So you're correct, the legacy decision could still technically be open, but I get the impression the tribunal could also say there'd really be no reason why a request for review wasn't received by this point. I believe it was issued in late February or sometime in March. We're sitting in mid-July, so they may, seriously question why the request for review hadn't come in at this point, and if they're not satisfied with the reasons, I get the impression they feel they can discard it.
So supplementary.
I guess until the orders change from the province and the regulations changed and the timelines reinstated again, I guess it'll always be open for debate.
Supplementary, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
That applied, I understand there's two appeal processes. One is to LPAT, the second is to Superior Court. Do you know if that applies to Superior Court, or is that a different set of rules, or have you inquired on that?
Mr. Pink?
I did not inquire on that. I'm not overly familiar with that, and I don't know what the timelines or the rules are surrounding it. We'd have to consult legal counsel on that.
I'd appreciate if that could be done, if that doesn't incur an undue cost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I would need to know if we want Mr. Pink to look into that, because it is going to cost money, because we're going to be going to a lawyer, a legal route. So everybody want to know that? Not want to know that? I don't think they're frozen, no. So I don't think so. Councillor Jaglowitz, I think you're on your own on that one.
I understand. Thank you for allowing me to raise the question anyway.
No problem. I believe Councillor Edwards, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just to David, because the screen froze, it was hard. Ricketts Lake, I believe he said that there was no decision on that. I thought there was a decision on that. The right of way going into it had to be widened. The owner that owns the land will not permit that, and that was frozen. So I don't know why there was no actual decision on that, if my mind is right on that, if my memory serves me right.
Mr. Pink?
I believe that the Committee of Adjustment at that time was reviewing concurrent applications. So the bylaw was in front of council, the severances were in front of Committee of Adjustment, and I'm fairly certain both matters were deferred. Yes, there was questions about the right-of-way. Yes, there were some concerns. There was concerns from neighboring property owners, and I believe it came back to committee on 2 occasions, and the Committee of Adjustment requested that the property owner consult with his neighbors and come back after that consultation, and neither council or committee made a decision. It's well in excess of the Planning Act timelines of, I think it's 90 or 120 days. And the property owner just quite recently decided to pursue an appeal to those lack of decisions rather than, I guess, come back to the Committee of Adjustment. But no, I guess to directly answer your question, a decision was not made on the severance.
And that's supplemental. So in other words, if we ask somebody to talk to their neighbors and come back to us and they just ignore it, they can then circumvent the process. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Pink?
Essentially, yes, although I wouldn't call it necessarily circumventing the process. Essentially, I understand the desire to consult and collaborate with your neighbors and come back, you know, with a mutually agreed upon solution. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, council's tasked with making the difficult decision. I don't think you can require as a condition that neighbors and an applicant get along and agree. If they don't, they don't. They're not required to do anything above and beyond that. And ultimately, it's up to committee to either then approve or refuse an application. And under the Planning Act, there's certain very specific, strict timelines as to when you have to make that decision. And if the decision is not made by that date, the applicant has the right to appeal that lack of decision, and that's the action they took. Again, I think that's a good lesson, you know, for council at large. I know that happens regularly in planning applications, and I completely understand the desire and the deferral with the hopes that a neighbor and an owner can work matters out. But at the end of the day, you can't require of an applicant to make sure all the neighbors agree with them. I don't think that's quite reasonable or feasible in every situation. And at the end of the day, council has to make a decision on an application, whether the neighbors agree with it or not. And that's how the cards fall. And if you don't make those decisions in certain timelines, then you're subject to potentially to an appeal. And that's what the applicant has done in this case.
Could I have a supplemental then? So what we should be doing is, if we're asking people to and that reconsider, put a 60-day timeline, 30-day timeline line to bring it back to either committee or council.
Mr. Pink?
You could certainly explore something like that and just make it very clear when you defer to the applicant and to staff that this matter must come back. I guess, but therein lies the difficulty. If a neighbor and a property owner were having very fruitful discussions but needed more time, you know, you've sort of forced a deadline, and therein lies, I guess, the difficulty in it all. You don't want to stifle good progress and discussion, but then again, you're exposed when you don't meet certain requirements. You know, in a perfect world, we work with applicants and council and staff, and you know, we try to work through the process without the threat of appeal hanging on our heads. But every once in a while, you will have an applicant that chooses that route, and that's their right, and you're not really going to be able to avoid it. And again, that's what's happened in this case.
Thank you very much. Just on another, could you computer? And I would really appreciate it. This is for like tomorrow and future meetings, because it's not working, whatever's happening. Okay, thank you.
Did you get, we didn't get that. Councillor Edwards, could you repeat that? You sort of went in and out there.
Well, that's what's happening. What I would like David to do is just set up a false Zoom meeting with me to see if I can get it on my computer. I'm using my iPad, and it's not convenient. And for some reason it wouldn't go on this morning. I sat there for 15 minutes and it wouldn't accept it. So I'd like to get that problem solved. If somebody could help me after the meeting. Thank you.
Do you have a 12-year-old that can help you?
He couldn't do it either, but I got a 3-year-old that's going to come in this afternoon.
So Councillor Edwards, I can do a Zoom call with you from my own account afterwards. If you'd like, then we'll do that. Okay, as sometime this afternoon, we'll set up a time. Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pink. And I believe that is the end of our agenda for today. So thank you, everyone. I think this is the new normal, and it seemed to work pretty well in terms of bringing everybody in and out. And so I think we're on our way. Okay, so I'm going to be it resolved, read this motion by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Hayes. Be it resolved that the Planning Committee adjourn at 11:49 a.m. and the next regular meeting be held on Thursday, August 13th, 2020 at 9 a.m. in the Council Chambers and Municipal Offices in Port Carling. All in favor? Okay. Thanks, everyone. And have a good afternoon. At least we're out of here today earlier. Okay.